I'm Alastair, and my daughter Tia has been performing in Hold Tight with Vincent Dance Theatre. Tia's first involvement with Vincent Dance Theatre was with In Loco Parentis, and she auditioned for that part, and to be honest, she was only 10 at the time, so when I went to collect her at lunchtime, I was actually surprised that she'd been asked to stay on for the afternoon session, and then at the end of the day she'd been invited to join the company. In Loco Parentis was quite an intense experience for Tia because it was the first long-term project that she'd been involved with. She'd previously made commercials and appeared on the stage in the chorus of different musicals. So this was the first time when she'd had a long run in a production and been involved in a production from the start. But I think it did help her that she had some previous experience of doing improv, because it helped her when she began to understand that she was actually involved in the making of the work, and that devising the work was part of the process, rather than typically she might have expected being involved in a theatre piece or a television piece or a broadcast piece to be supplied lines and a script and everything to be almost set in stone from the outset, and it really all to be about polishing that. Whereas creating the piece from the outset, I think it was really stimulating for her. It was heartbreaking for Tia that the coronavirus pandemic led to the cancellation of the last shows of In Loco Parentis. By that stage she'd performed in 3. She was really enjoying the work, and she was really enjoying seeing the fruits of that work. And she was also very close to the cast, and for that suddenly to be cut off was a terrible shock for her, just as the pandemic was a shock for everybody. And so it was a joy really for her to have the opportunity to come back and work with some of the same people again to make Hold Tight. So Tia joined a company of 3 other girls, one of whom was an understudy and one of whom she already knew, being from the same school. This time around, what's made it different for Tia is having other members of the cast of roughly the same age group who hadn't been through the process before. I think previously she was one voice in 2, and this time she's been one voice in 4, and I think she's found it harder to deal with her ideas not being taken up and developed and moved forward. And also I think, you know, she's a different age now, and the consequence of that is that she's been less trusting of what she's saying and her own suggestions. She's just got a certain teenage shyness about her that she didn't have when she was 11. One of the great things about the way that Charlotte develops the work from the start is that she makes it fun from the start, and she introduces fun from day one. And that rolls through the length of the development process. However, this time it seems to have been foreshortened, and therefore that fun element has had to be set aside a little bit earlier, as the serious hard work of creating something that people would want to come and see and enjoy and understand has taken place. So working with the other cast members is always pleasurable, but it's been very difficult because it's been slightly stricter. She understands that when a director gives a direction, she has to follow that direction, and that's different to being at home when she can answer back and argue back, and being a teenager, that's something that she does a lot, and at school too. So just having that discipline and having to work very hard, and also having to cope with the frustrations of developing a piece along the way, whether somebody else is becomes unwell or is unable to do a particular thing, and also it not being the same as last time, and it not being exactly the same, and the process not being exactly the same. I think the larger cast has led to a significant ramping up in the discipline that is required of the performers, and that was certainly the case with Tia. The consequence of that is, while she was actually working and in the studio, she found that really very, very intense. And consequently, when it was break time, she really did want to break. She wanted to be a different person. She was really exploding with adrenaline and just wanting to have some sort of output, as it were. What was also really noticeable is that having the larger cast has meant that there was always more support, whether it was from her fellow young performers or from the senior members of the cast, 3 of whom she worked with before, and the 4th of whom she got on really well with anyway. The hardest part about the touring for Tia is occupying herself during the dead time, because there are 2 things that she can do. Either she can socialise or she can do her schoolwork, and keeping up with schoolwork's been really important, but also squeezing in that socialising and having 2 or 3 children of the same age travelling with her. She obviously wants to be spending her time with them, and not being able to do that as much as she'd like, and understanding that this is work and there's socialising and there are lines that have to be drawn, has been particularly difficult for her. She does actually like the touring, she doesn't mind the travelling, she loves various aspects of hotel life, but having her parents constantly chaperoning her is a struggle, especially as she's a 13-year-old and is at that stage when she's pushing people away. Tia finds it very difficult to talk about the work she's in. She found it very difficult to talk about In Loco Parentis, and she finds it quite tricky to talk about Hold Tight. And I think some of that is because some of the themes are quite intense and they're quite serious, and they're things that at her age she doesn't really want to be discussing and addressing, especially not with her parents. But they are things that she certainly discusses with her friends, especially some of the content, and with the other cast members. But she's been comfortable with the work that she's been doing. She's really enjoyed the physical aspects of it. She doesn't mind being completely exhausted at the end of the day. She loves working with the senior cast members and seems to have a really good rapport with all 4 of them. One of the things we wanted to make sure from the outset was that we created a space for her in which that she could talk if there was anything that came up during the devising of the production that she felt uncomfortable with. But one of the interesting things about the way that Charlotte Vincent works is that she creates that space within the production itself, and that's really, really noticeable. I haven't worked with another organisation, and Tia has done various bits of professional and amateur work, but I haven't worked with another organisation that has set the standard so high in terms of safeguarding, not just physical safeguarding, but safeguarding of mental health and caring about people's emotions and what they might think about things. So in that respect, I've had no concerns about the subject matter or the way that it's handled by the company or the cast members, simply because there is this great circle of care, a ball of care that is created around the young performers. So I've had no qualms whatsoever, and that was apparent when she worked with Vincent Dance Theatre previously on In Loco Parentis, that there was this aura of care that was created around the young performers. What was noticeable the first time I saw the work as a run-through was how much was actually going on the stage that I didn't see. My eyes were fixed so much on my own child that I really didn't see everything else that was going on the stage. And nevertheless, I found the work very impressive, and I also found it very moving. However, maybe the second or third time that I saw the work as a run through from start to finish, and I did take in much more of what was on the stage, I found it deeply moving. And you know, I don't mind saying that, I cried, and yet I'd started off, laughing out loud. So yeah, I found it a really interesting process to see how much progress had been made. And having not seen a huge amount of the initial rehearsals, but heard them, the transformation from how it began to how it's ended up, and I've seen several different endings of the show, has been really impressive. And it is a really interesting show in that respect, in that one starts thinking, oh, this is going to be amusing, and it is amusing, and for half an hour there are laughs aplenty, but when it takes a dark turn, it really does so in quite spectacular fashion. And then as the show goes on and that intensity is maintained, you do realise that the young performers are deeply involved in this, and yet even so, even while they're on the stage, they're still being protected, and there is still this aura of care around them, and that's actually demonstrated through the theatrics of the show and the dance in the show. I asked what Tia thought Hold Tight was about, and I also asked guests who'd come to see the show and family members who'd seemed to come to see the show, and everybody really kind of agreed about what it was about. That is, that they felt that it was about coming back after the pandemic and how that had almost led straight into the war in Ukraine, and how everybody's lives have been disrupted in so many different ways, and that that isn't over. But ultimately, it's the child performers and the next generation that are going to be the future. And that, in a nutshell, for me, is what the show was about, and a deeply moving show too.